So welcome back to Foresight Paradigm. This is Paradigmatic Discussions number 2. I'm going to be discussing Thomas Jefferson and the secular founding of America. I'm speaking with author Chris Rodda. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having.
This is one of your books that I have here. So you wrote a whole series of books refuting David Barton and his claims, his lies, his book called Jefferson Lies, which was full of lies about Jefferson. And I believe Christian bookstores stopped selling it because of the inaccuracies in it. Is that right?
The publisher, Thomas Nelson Publishing,
Okay.
actually pulled it, and the History News Network, in a poll, it was voted the something like the most unreliable history book in history, or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
bad.
When I look at David Barton, even his speeches, it really the only adjective that comes to mind is like just slimy. Just like a slimy used car salesman. I mean, you can just tell that he's a dishonest person, and to me, what the big key is with Jefferson and all the other founders is the quotes, their personal letters and correspondence. Their quotes absolutely refute any notion that they were any kind of Christian that we would call Christian today anyway.
Right.
They were definitely products of the Enlightenment, and they were secularists, and they were free thinkers, and they were religious skeptics, and you can see it embodied in the documents that they, authored and put together also.
Right. Well,
Def
what Barton does is to take the documents, take snippets out of context,
right,
and heavily edit those quotes to make it appear that there's one particular one, not Jefferson, but John Adams, where Adams was being totally sarcastic about the Holy Ghost and the Trinity, because of course Adams was a Unitarian, did not believe in the Trinity. What Barton does
right.
is just quote like a couple sentences and cuts it off right before the sentence that made it very apparent that Adams was being sarcastic. So
Right.
that's what he does. He takes snippets. So there's Adams talking about the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
Adams was a good Trinitarian, and it's like, no, he was being absolutely
And
sarcastic.
and I know Adams has a quote talking about, and I think it's to Jefferson talking about, that to believe that the God of the or the creator of the universe came to this little ball to be spit upon by Jews is like, ridiculous and blasphemous. And he says that there will never be any liberal science until this blasphemy is got rid of.
Yeah.
He denied demons and the existence of hell, I believe, and all kinds of things. He was very unorthodox himself, though more conservative than Jefferson. Uh, yeah,
More conservative than Jefferson, especially earlier in life, he was not opposed to he described it as the mild establishment of religion in Massachusetts, and he was not. But as he got older, he totally rejected all religious establishments and was
yeah.
totally them and on board with Jefferson.
I'm sure you're familiar with the great Enlightenment scholar Jonathan Israel. Uh, he's wrote a lot of books about the Enlightenment, and he wrote a book recently about the American Revolution, and he classifies Adams as a more moderate Enlightenment. So his thesis is like there's a radical Enlightenment and there's a moderate Enlightenment, and there's kind of a split there. So,
Yeah,
and he,
yeah.
yeah. So I want to start off with a quote from Carl Sagan, kind of summing up the importance of Jefferson. So Carl Sagan says Jefferson was an early hero of mine, not because of his scientific interest, although that very much helped mold his political philosophy, but because he, almost more than anyone else, was responsible for the spread of democracy throughout the world. The idea, breathtaking, radical, and revolutionary at the time, and in many places in the world it still is that not kings, not priests, not big city bosses, but ordinary people working together are to rule the nations. Not only was Jefferson a leading uh, theoretician of the cause, he was also involved in the most practical way, helping to bring about the great American political experiment that has all over the world been admired and emulated since. Now, he died in July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day after the colonies issued that stirring document written by Jefferson called the Declaration of Independence. It was denounced by conservatives worldwide. Monarchy, aristocracy, and state supported religion is what conservatives were defending then. In a letter composed a few days before his death, he wrote that it was the light of science that had demonstrated that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor were a favored few born booted and spurred. And he also in that letter talks about how the Declaration was kind of a signal arousing men to burst the chains of monkish ignorance and superstition, uh, under which they had been persuaded to bind themselves. Sagan goes on to say, when we consider the founders of our nation, Jefferson, Washington, Madison, Monroe, Franklin, Tom Paine, and many others, we have before us a list of at least 10, maybe a dozen great political leaders. They were well educated, products of the European Enlightenment. They were students of history. They knew human fallibility and weakness and corruptibility. They were fluent in the English language. They wrote their own speeches. They were realistic and practical, and at the same time motivated by high principles. They were not checking the pollsters on what to think. They knew what to think. They were interested in, and at least two of them fluent in science. At that time, there were only about 2.5 million citizens of the United States. Today, there are about 100 times more. So, if there were 10 people of the caliber of Thomas Jefferson then, there ought to be 10 times 100 equals 1,000 Thomas Jeffersons today. Where are they?
That's a
Good
great
question.
question.
And so he goes on to end this. He quotes Rossiter from his book, the Seed Time of America, the Seed Time of the Republic, 1953. That the twin doctrines of separation of church and state and liberty of individual conscience are the marrow of our democracy, if not indeed America's most magnificent contribution to the freeing of Western man. And I think that's a good summation of why Jefferson is important and why getting him right, and the founding right is important. And it's really the paradigm under which we should operate. That it was a secular foundation. That these people they talked about the religious war and persecution that preceded them and the centuries preceding them. The unfreedom, you know, that really, if you think about it, naturally ensues from religion because religion is inherently intolerant. You know, you have a doctrine that tells people they're going to go to hell, they're going to burn forever if they don't believe what you believe, then that's not conducive to fairness, to equality, to peace, to unity, at all. Um, So, and Jefferson is definitely he's in my pantheon of intellectual heroes, but kind of with an asterisk, and we can get into some of that maybe a little later on in the discussion. But if you would, Mr. Rodda, tell me about again your book, "The Jefferson Lies," or refuting, debunking David Barton's Jefferson Lies. How did you get into this? Like, how did you start studying it, and how did you kind of get into this? I guess kind of quarrel that you had with David Barton.
Well, it actually started back, I don't know if you remember, way back around 2002, 2003. Remember Judge Roy Moore with the Ten Commandments rock in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Alabama courthouse? Okay. Well, I was doing something totally different at the time, work-wise, and just happened to be on AOL, the old AOL that had message boards and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And anytime there was a news story, you could click to go to a message board. So there's this
Right.
story about Roy Moore and his rock, and I wasn't really active in any of this sort of stuff yet. I was doing, like I said, I was doing something totally different, and I just had some
Right.
time to kill, so I clicked on the message board for this story. And I've always been interested in American history, going back to when I was a kid, and I started seeing some of the stuff these people were posting and thinking, well, no, that can't be true. That can't be true. That can't be. And I started, questioning these and looking up stuff and replying to these comments. And my posts started getting like longer and longer, refuting some of these fundies that were on this message board. And then they're like, well, you can't prove that. And then eventually I started like footnoting my AOL message board posts and all the people who were on the side of, our side, the separation churches, they started like just really applauding like my posts, the things I was, the research I started doing. And eventually they said, you should really write a book. And I was like, I'd never written anything in my life.
How many books did you write total?
Well, I wrote, the big one was Liars for Jesus, Volume 1. That was in 2006.
I believe I have that too. Yeah.
Right. That was the big one.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's also a Volume 2 of that I published in 2016. And then those Jefferson books. Well, eventually, back to the story. Eventually, I did get talked into writing the book, which came out in 2006.
You didn't actually finish the series, did you? I think you, or did you? The one refuting David Barton, the specific.
The Jefferson Lies one. No,
Yeah.
His book died on its own. So I had written two volumes. I had intended to do a little book, and those are just short books, like one refuting each chapter.
Right.
And I had intended to do all 7, but then the book just kind of died on its own. It got so trashed and pulled by the publisher. Even they put out the WorldNet Daily Publishing Company, publishing arm, put out a second edition of it, and that just died. So it didn't keep going. If it had kept going and that had remained popular and people were reading it and whatever, I would have kept going with refuting it.
Okay.
But I decided to move on to other things because it just sort of had
just died on its own. It was so bad.
Died off. Yeah, it wasn't necessary because it died a natural death.
Yeah.
So it's funny what you were just saying. I have a new book out now called From Theocracy to Religious Liberty. What that is the this just came out in the last couple weeks. It's the story of.
I'm writing that down because I definitely want to check that out.
It's the story of what happened. Lots has been written about, Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists, coining the phrase separation between church and state.
Right.
This book is the story of what happened in Connecticut after that, because Connecticut, it was another 16 years before Connecticut actually had a state constitution and religious freedom. Because Jefferson wrote the letter to the Danbury Baptists in January 1802, and it was the summer of 1818 that Connecticut finally held a constitutional convention, because they had been operating under their charter of Charles II from 1662, and all the religious laws made under that. And something you said about the monarchists and the people with Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Party, the party that Jefferson's party was opposed to. It looks like I lost you there.
No, you didn't. I'm just sharing my screen.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing. The party the Federalists, the party that was opposed to Jefferson, they actually decried the Declaration of Independence and wouldn't celebrate like the 4th of July, and because
that was the Federalists, right?
The Federalists, they were monarchist or Christian,
and they instituted the Alien and Sedition Act, right?
Excuse me?
They're the ones that kind of instituted under, when John Adams was president, the Alien and Sedition Act.
Yes.
So that meant basically that they could arrest or fine anybody that said anything negative about the government, and they could like kind of deport people or keep people from coming from other countries. Like I believe Jefferson's friend from France, Volney, who was an atheist who was part of the French Revolution, he kind of, I think he got deported or had to leave or something. I don't remember.
Well, most people are familiar with the sedition part of it, which you couldn't write anything about the government. The alien part, the Federalists wanted to. In my new book, I point out how many similarities there were between the parties back then and the parties now, and one of them was that they wanted less people to be able to vote, and they were very anti-immigrant because they knew that more people being able to vote and new immigrants coming to the country being able to vote would put them out of power. So that's like one of the many similarities, and the other was, of course, that Jefferson's party was, a danger to religion, against religion. They even
Yeah.
said that they would try to undermine the institution of marriage, and all stuff that sounds so familiar today.
Right.
The two parties back then were, I mean, it's just uncanny, the parallels between the two parties, and especially in their stronghold was New England, and particularly Connecticut, where the Danbury Baptists were.
Right. And I think Jefferson, he kind of fell short in some ways as president, but I think as soon as he got into office, he kind of rescinded the Alien and Sedition Act, right?
It actually, yes, he did, and
Okay.
also the Sedition Act actually only was passed by the Adams administration, only to apply to the Adams administration and expire at the end of Adams's term.
Right.
And what Jefferson did was to pardon the people who had been convicted under it.
Yeah. I wanted to just share this real quick, Miss Rhoda. This is from a trip I took to DC to the Jefferson Memorial, and I ended up spending like hours there because it's just covered in, I don't know if you've been or not, but just great kind of
When
like
I was
in,
a kid, haven't been there in years.
yeah. Well, it's just covered in great like Jefferson quotes, Enlightenment quotes. Like I found that, I've done a few podcasts about the Enlightenment and I've studied it a lot. And, a lot of people in America don't seem to even know what the Enlightenment is. So, that big chunk of the founding of their country, they're completely ignorant of. But if you go to the Jefferson Memorial, you'll have like displays like this that talks about the Enlightenment. Can you see it pretty well?
I'm on an iPad Mini, so the answer to
Here, let
that has to
me.
be no.
All right, that's a little bigger. Can you see it a little better?
uh, I can only.
That's okay. I'll read it for you. It just says the Enlightenment takes root. It talks about progress. The central idea of the Enlightenment was taken for granted. Here, freedom would guarantee scientific discovery. Discovery would yield prosperity. Progress would also bring moral advancement with laws that protected the rights of individuals while promoting, as Jefferson put it, the pursuit of happiness. Um, and then let's see. He has this great quote about the illimitable freedom of the mind. He says, I believe this was talking about his University of Virginia. It says, here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error as long as reason is left free to combat it. So that's a good quote. And if you go to the rotunda, where the statue is, you see, there's this great quote. I get to it. There, I'm sure you're familiar with this one.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also to keep pace with the times. We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when a boy, as civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors. And it's funny. One quote there in the rotunda, he talks about the tyranny over the mind of man that he swore eternal hostility upon the altar of God against. A lot of people don't know that's from a quote in 1800 from a letter to Benjamin Rush, and the tyranny of man, the tyranny of mind that he's referring to is the Christian clergy who were trying to block his presidency.
Right.
And he said, they believe that any power confided in me will be in opposition to their schemes, and they believe rightly. So, I mean,
Well, you
that's
had the attacks, the Reverend William Lynn and John Mason, two Presbyterian clergymen from New York, that put out these pamphlets in 1800, and to try to get Jefferson not elected. And they were
right.
just scare tactic. And this is where the stuff started that then resurfaced with the Federalist Party throughout Jefferson's presidency, he was a danger to religion and all that. But
Right.
what they did was they quoted heavily from like his Notes on Virginia, Notes on the State of Virginia, his book,
Right.
and everything they could find, and all the proof that he was an atheist, an infidel, and you
Hmm.
know, going to destroy religion and all of
And he was
that.
decried as
So,
an atheist an awful lot around that time. So
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And Jefferson didn't publicly refute anything, but he did close friends,
Right.
particularly Benjamin Rush, did write about it a little bit in their correspondence, but he kind of just, you know, let it happen. And of course, he was elected anyway.
Yeah.
But it gets interesting that even after he was president, the attacks of the clergy, back to what's in my new book, especially when it gets like towards the end of Jefferson's presidency and into Madison's with the War of 1812, and how pro-British the Federalists had become. When you had mentioned earlier about monarchists and aristocratic people, this is the Federalist Party,
Right.
and the sermons of the Presbyterian Congregationalist clergy from New England during that time, the pro-British. There was one that what was his name? Elijah Parrish was one of the big, like, and some of these ministers back then, they weren't just some little local minister that just preached a sermon to their congregation and that's as far as it went. Their sermons were published. There were some that were national figures, like the way you'd have like Pat Robertson or Joel Osteen or somebody today that is a nationally known name. Some
Right.
of these ministers back then were as well known, and Elijah Parrish was one of the big ones. And one of his sermons during the War of 1812, it was so patriotic for Britain that it was reprinted in Canada and recommended to the clergy in Canada, the British clergy in Canada, to imitate as an example of this unparalleled patriotism. And this is an American minister who,
Right.
but then they were like rooting for the British. And this is only 30 years after the American Revolution, 30, 40 years. And you had, the Federalists, and I mean, it was just unbelievable that they could go from, and some of them that even had fought in the Revolutionary War and had turned pro-British
Well,
by the
Miss
War of 1812.
Miss Rhoda, this is a blog I did a couple years ago, kind of comparing Jesus and Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, thought Jesus was a great moral teacher, but he didn't think that, any part of the, Christian mythology was true and thought it was actually pretty awful. But I just point out a couple things, that some people throw them both off completely with some justification because they were both products of their time. Given that one actually existed, which we don't really know for sure, but given that he did, they both kind of have some issues and they were both flawed. But they both also, produced some things that were actually not completely original and kind of the documents that their names are attached to, but still very, very world changing. And so I just kind of go through that. I just wanted to shoot that real quick, a blog I did. And I really want to get into the quotes of Jefferson and some of the others because, again, they are so key to refuting anything. I mean, this disproves any attempt by, Christian dominionists or nationalists or whatever you want to call them to try to distort history. This is a documentary that I found called "The Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers." It's actually a Christian documentary, and they're quoting accurately like the quotes of Jefferson, showing that Christians like David Barton are completely, full of crap, you know, and they're coming at it from a different perspective, but they're accurate in what they're reporting at, at least when it comes to the founders. And so I wanted to play this clip because it has some really great quotes of Jefferson. And you'll hear the narrator kind of being like, again, coming from a different perspective, like, they think it's horrible, but people like us know it's great, you know. So it's just a good, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but it's good just kind of any viewers that might not have seen it kind of get a taste of some of the quotes.
Who is it looks familiar. Who is this by?
I'm not sure. I actually messaged him years ago. I forget his name. He's a pastor, but you can look it up on YouTube. It's called "The Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers."
It looks familiar.
Um,
Yeah.
apparently from 2010. But I'll go ahead and play a clip of it here, and then we'll get into some more quotes. Let me know if you can hear it. All right.
While the Bible warns believers to beware of being spoiled through
Can
philosophy,
you hear it?
one man who seems to have disregarded this warning
Can you hear it?
was Thomas
Yes.
Jefferson.
Okay.
Jefferson is one of America's most important founders. The man who drafted the Declaration of Independence. He is often featured prominently by those who argue that America was founded on Christian principles. But his own letters make it clear that he had no great love for Christianity or the Bible. The idea that we have pastors and teachers who would somehow or other hold up Thomas Jefferson as an example of a godly man who in any way supported Christianity is just unbelievable. Jefferson, much like Thomas Paine, and they were good friends, Jefferson not only did not embrace Christianity, but he made it his business to denounce Christianity at every turn. And at best, he encouraged people toward unbelief and doubt and so on. But the idea that he somehow or other was representing a biblical view or representing Christian principles and so on is provably false based upon his own quotes. In a letter to General Alexander Smith on January 17, 1825, Jefferson was commenting on the book of Revelation. He said, "It is between 50 and 60 years since I read it, and I then considered it as merely the ravings of a maniac, no more worthy nor capable of explanation than the incoherences of our own nightly dreams." Through the rest of his letter, Jefferson makes it clear that he had not repented of this view. You have people who try to defend the idea of America as a Christian nation, and here they hold up Thomas Jefferson somehow as an example of a founding father who had a faith that any of us who are Christians should imitate or embrace. And it's sad and it's very disturbing because of the things that Jefferson said about the Bible and about the gospel in particular. Some have tried to whitewash Jefferson because supposedly he thought Jesus was a fine teacher of morality. But here is what he actually said. The greatest of all the reformers of the depraved religion of his own country was Jesus of Nazareth. Abstracting what is really his from the rubbish in which it is buried is easily distinguished by its luster from the dross of his biographers, and as separable as the diamond from the dunghill. And what he's talking about is the process that he went through as he was putting together his so-called Jefferson Bible. And the proper title, his original title, today it's known as the Jefferson Bible, but the original title is The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And sometimes there are those who will even lift up the Jefferson Bible as an example that somehow or other Thomas Jefferson at some point embraced Christianity or the Lord Jesus Christ. But the truth is not at all. If you read his own letters, what Jefferson says in his own letters about his Jefferson Bible tells us what he was really thinking. And he's again expressing the Enlightenment view that he believed there were some things in the Bible, in the New Testament, concerning the Lord Jesus Christ that were true and accurate, but that they had been covered up or mingled with this corrupt information that he says is the product of inferior minds. There are quotes where Jefferson is denouncing the Old Testament. There are quotes where Jefferson is denouncing the New Testament. Concerning the Old Testament, Jefferson wrote, "Where get we the 10 Commandments? The book indeed gives them to us verbatim, but where did it get them? For itself tells us they were written by the finger of God on tables of stone, which were destroyed by Moses. But the whole history of these books is so defective and doubtful that it seems vain to attempt minute inquiry into it. And such tricks have been played with their text and with the texts of other books relating to them, that we have a right from that cause to entertain much doubt what parts of them are genuine. In the same letter to John Adams, he writes, "In the New Testament, there is internal evidence that parts of it have proceeded from an ignorant man, and that other parts are of the fabric of very inferior minds. It is as easy to speak those parts as to pick out diamonds in hills." When one reads the Jefferson Bible, it becomes clear what Jefferson was referring to when he mentioned dunghills. What he does in his Jefferson Bible is he specifically omits all of the supernatural elements of the Gospels. He omits the virgin birth of Christ. He omits the miracles that Jesus performed. Obviously, he omits the resurrection of Christ and so on, his ascension into heaven. Anything that was contrary to the philosophies of reason that had been set forth, he pushes out of his representation of the New Testament. And he not only omits those things, but in his letters, he denounces them in the most derogatory language you can imagine. Very insulting, very condescending. Concerning Jesus himself, Jefferson wrote, "Among the sayings and discourses imputed to him, I find many passages of fine imagination, correct morality, and of the most lovely benevolence, and others, again, of so much ignorance, so much absurdity, so much untruth, charlatanism, and imposture. I separate, therefore, the gold from the dross, and leave the latter to the stupidity of some and roguery of others of his disciples. Of this band of dupes and impostors, Paul was the first corrupter of the doctrines of Jesus." And so the idea that he was in any way promoting Christianity is at best a deception. And teachers who are teaching that are either unfamiliar with the letters of Thomas Jefferson, or they're simply lying to their congregation or their audience about what Jefferson really believed. From his letter, there's the quote from Thomas Jefferson to his nephew, Peter Carr, who was at school studying and so on. And rather than admonish him, as the Puritans would have done, and you can read, like the letters of William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, and William Penn is encouraging his children in reading the Bible, in Bible devotions, etc., and so on. But when Jefferson writes his letter to his nephew, he's not encouraging him in that way at all. He's really encouraging him toward doubt and toward unbelief.
Okay. So we'll stop there.
I
But that's just,
apologize for my dog barking if you heard that.
I did it. No worries.
Okay.
Okay. So we're back to normal. So yeah. All right. Okay, but yeah, I thought that was a good little like summation of, the letters of Jefferson and how they just, completely disprove any idea that, he was anyway a Christian, or that he promoted a Christian government or any of that. I did want to read a couple of more quotes, if you don't mind, to kind of get your input on them.
Sure.
So this is from a book. See if you can see it here. Let's see. It's not gonna show. Hold on. Yeah, you got it a little bit.
I can't see it at all. You're just gonna have to read the title.
Wow, it's just not gonna show. Okay.
Nope.
Oh, a little piece of it. Okay.
The
Well,
title though. What's the title?
it's called The Expanding Blaze: How the American Revolution Ignited the World by Jonathan Israel. And it's a kind of a massive book all about the revolution. So now some of this is like personally about Jefferson and his formation, and some of it's about more generally the other founders in the American Revolution. So he says, John Quincy Adams, who was John Adams' son, talked about how it was the Enlightenment philosophy Jefferson imbibed in the 1760s from a certain teacher at William and Mary's College in Virginia. He observed disparagingly that led Jefferson to the mysteries of free thinking and irreligion, loose morals, and becoming, if not an absolute atheist, someone without belief in a future existence. An avid reader, polymath, and convinced deist, Jefferson in fact derived his philosophical outlook from a wide range of English and French writers. Jefferson, like Paine, combined his publicly more explicit animosity to religious authority with a more sweeping Republican reformism and frequently declared hostility to aristocracy. So, would you say that's pretty much accurate as far
Yes.
as okay? Now he says more generally about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment in Europe and the Americas tried to bring about, as one recent historian put it, through science, philosophical endeavor, critique of religion, educational reorganization, law reform, and studying political theory, a new hopeful society. The vast movement of intellectual and cultural reformism and renewal comprehensively revolutionized philosophy, theology, historiography, the exact sciences, social science, literature, and moral thought, and continue to strive for amelioration. Um, so that's kind of a general like overview of the Enlightenment and what that was about. Um, Maybe 1 second. So he talks about the Radical Enlightenment, and he puts Jefferson in the Radical Enlightenment camp. The Radical Enlightenment built its pursuit of happiness exclusively on secular values, wholly eradicating religious authority. Hence, whenever an enlightener's views entail systematic elimination of theology, clergy, and state support for churches from the political sphere and education, demanding full secularization of public authority and comprehensive separation of church and state, he belongs to the Radical Enlightenment, whether he admitted to being an atheist and materialist or not. Um, he says that Adams and Jefferson both thought that the disheartening reverses that they saw and later, when they were older, they agreed was due to superstition, ignorance, and defects in men's understanding of society, politics, and religion. In other words, insufficient enlightenment. And he says, oh, this is good. Talking about the Declaration of Independence, and I want to get into this more deeply in this here, because we have the Declaration. People talk about it mentions God 4 times, and I believe you mentioned, as David Barton put it, that it indicated independence from Britain and dependence on God. It's how he put it.
Right.
So
he also claims that it's incorporated into the Constitution because the Constitution is signed in the attestation clause says in the year of our independence. That therefore makes the Declaration of Independence part of the Constitution, adding 4 references to God to the Constitution. This is Barton's
all right.
twisted logic.
Yeah.
Things like
And
that.
you say he only put the only reference Jefferson put is the laws of nature and nature's God.
Right.
That's the only one Jefferson put. Okay.
Yeah. The rest were added by the committee.
So Israel says Jefferson, his version avoided all reference to God and divine sanction, blamed American slavery on the British Crown, and stated that all men are created equal and independent, and that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable. This original committee then amended, toning down its Painite tendency and inserting the reference to God. Congress then amended it further, much to Jefferson's chagrin. Now, I know there's a great book called Nature's God, The Heretical Origins of the American Republic by Matthew Stewart. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not. But it kind of just...
I'm not familiar with that particular book.
Okay. Well, it's been a while since I read that one, but he basically is talking about how you can kind of like get from that nature's God that it's not, it's not obviously not a Christian God, and it could have been. They could have explicitly, all through American documents, they could have made it explicitly Christian, depending on Jesus, things like that. And there were several attempts to do that, to make America legally a Christian nation. And
The National Reform Association, this started during the Civil War into the 1870s. They actually wanted to amend the preamble of the Constitution to recognize Jesus. And the craziness of that, besides wanting to make the Constitution recognize Jesus, is how do you amend a preamble is the statement of the people who wrote that document as to why they were writing that document. You can't go back and change a preamble and say, no, that's not why they wrote that document. They just made a mistake. They were really writing it for, I mean, it was insane. But it happened again in the as recent as in the 1950s. There was a big debate in the Senate Judiciary Committee where again they wanted to add to amend the Constitution to recognize Jesus. This has happened, I don't know how many times in this country's history with them wanting to amend the Constitution.
yeah, if you think about like the First Amendment, you know, so it says, you know, it basically guarantees religious liberty, and the First Commandment and the Ten Commandments is completely, you know, the opposite of that. Worship only me, worship no other God, right? And there's many examples you can find like that where Christian and Jewish theology completely contradict Enlightenment and American documents, government, you know, that are all about freedom. And I'm sure you know about Andrew Seidel. He wrote a book called The Founding Myth.
Yeah.
And I do have a couple quotes I want to share
I
that
know
are
that book,
great
yes.
from this book. Yeah, it's a very good book. But there's just all kinds of points you point to that, you know, show how contradictory these two different worldviews are.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
one last quote from the Expanding Blaze is Israel says the Jefferson system can safely be said to blend a Spinozistic critique of providence, ceremonies, miracles, priestcraft, Bible criticism, and religion generally, with Bale's questioning of the justice of the biblical God, and Bolingbroke's equally God, I can't say that word. Talking about Spinoza,
Yeah.
doctrine of the equal moral status of all men and people before nature's God. So would you condone that summation that he did there?
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, it's typical. Like so many people have said, like basically the same things in different words, comparing to different people. You know, it's like,
All right.
you know, just the whole thing that comes out of it is just so obvious
Yeah.
that what you've been saying throughout this whole podcast is that, you know, Jefferson, product of the Enlightenment,
Right.
considered Jesus, the morals of Jesus to be a good philosophy,
Yeah.
but was absolutely not any kind of Christian as you would think of a Christian today. Even the Unitarians back then, they considered themselves a sect of Christianity, but they did not believe in the Trinity or anything else that would the fundamentalist Christians or Christians of today would consider them Christian, but
Right.
yet try to claim them. And Jefferson actually, you know, people say, oh, well, you know, nobody knows for sure what his beliefs were or whatever. He did actually state in a letter, I don't have it handy, I have it in one of my books,
Yeah.
that there was a letter he wrote where he actually flat out said he was a Unitarian. And meaning did not believe in the Trinity.
Right.
Was not an atheist, but did not believe in the Trinity. So for
Well, I have a
these,
question. There's several. I want to get into a few more letters of his. One of them is about where he does flat out call himself a materialist, and he talks about how if we say that like God is immaterial, then that's saying God doesn't exist. And to me, that gets really close to the way I'm interpreting it to Spinoza's kind of like God is nature a little bit.
right,
It's always he almost seems like a pantheist because if God is a material, then how could it be in any way be any kind of even deistic God, you know, that has to be some type of, you know, spirit or mind or something. If God is material, it has to be nature, right? So, I think that's a letter to John Adams, and I can look that up here in a second. But I want, what do you think about that? Because he's a materialist, but not an atheist. So how does that
He
work?
also called himself an Epicurean. He also called himself,
Yeah.
I mean, he called himself through the years, through his correspondence, he called himself
He
like
said, "I'm a
so
sect to
many,
myself,"
so
as far as
many
I know.
different things that it's kind of like, it almost seems times like he really wasn't sure what he believed. I mean,
There were times he wasn't sure if he believed in a future state or not. Sometimes
yeah,
it
yeah.
seemed like maybe I have a hope, maybe, and sometimes he
Well,
seemed to not think so.
what's
Uh,
easy to pin down is what he didn't believe.
right,
You know
right,
what I mean? But to pin down what he did believe, where in his letters, he the various different things that he called himself all add up to he was not a Christian in any sort of traditional sense of the word that anybody today would consider a Christian.
he
Okay,
was a secularist that did not believe in any part of Christian mythology, basically.
right, and then he also had just thought everything to do with like the church and the establishments and the rules and
Right,
all of that
very
was just
anti-clergy. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it just so for the Christians, the Christian nationalists now to try to claim him as a Christian by taking snippets here or snippets there. I mean, there's
Right,
one letter that gets quoted a lot by him, and that one of the ones where he says that the morals was like of Jesus were like the best system ever, and then
right,
they cut off that right after that, and he says that, but he was only human.
right. So
Okay,
dishonest.
so
Yeah,
they cut that off. So this is how they do it as far as Barton and other Christian nationalists like history revisionists is,
yeah,
yes, you can cherry pick a sentence here, a sentence there, and make Jefferson out as a Christian. And the problem is that an awful lot of people listen to that, believe that, do not check these quotes for themselves,
right,
and we'll say, well, Barton has a library of 100,000 original documents. Who are you to be, contradicting him? What they don't get is the faulty logic of like, just because he has a document doesn't guarantee that he's quoting that document accurately.
right,
But he's such a, his spiel and his salesmanship of this and his fast talking that he just gets these people believing that he is the keeper of American history and the protector of American history, and that he and they also think that when he says he has a copy of a document or owns a document, that that's the only copy of it.
yeah,
Where even letters that he owns, okay, the few actual that one John Adams letter that I mentioned earlier, where Adams was actually being sarcastic. Okay, yes, Barton does own the original of that letter. That does not mean he's the only person to have access to that letter, because it was recorded in a book by a descendant of Benjamin Rush in the 1800s. So
right,
there are so very few things that there is only one copy of or only one person has access to, because before these letters fell into private hands or the hands of collectors, they were recorded somewhere. They were in
right.
some book. They were, so but the problem is that Barton's followers don't realize that.
Yeah. Do you think that Jefferson would be an atheist today?
Would he be an atheist?
Yeah. Given
Um,
everything we know about, I guess, evolution, and I
yeah,
mean,
that's
the
it's
thing is
something.
though, that
I
makes
wonder,
me
he'd
wonder.
definitely be a evolutionist.
Yeah,
Obviously, anything to do with science,
yeah.
he would be on the side of science, and
I
that
tend to think
would
he would be an
possibly
atheist.
make him an atheist.
Yeah,
I don't like to assign beliefs to anybody.
sure. Well, the thing is, he owned the works of Dolbach, the System of Nature and the Encyclopedia of Diderot. And he knew when he was in France, you know, he knew Condorcet,
Yeah,
who was
yeah,
a kind of an atheist, and he knew Grimm, who was Diderot's best friend.
yeah.
So he talked about it in his letters. He really knew their work, and they had evolutionary ideas. I mean, Diderot lays out evolution by natural selection, and going back to the letter on the blind, which he got locked up for in 1749.
Right.
Um, so Jefferson kind of knew about evolutionary ideas, and people
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Comte de
absolutely.
Buffon. He was a naturalist in the 18th century. He had evolutionary ideas. So, but I still think that the accumulation of evidence supporting evolution, you know, after them, you know, he was alive when Lamarck was doing his work too, but still Darwin, and afterwards, I think that would have, definitely convinced him of evolution.
Well, even
Uh,
look at when he was founding the University of Virginia, there was but I haven't looked at this stuff in a long time, but there was something he wanted to steer clear of as far as there were two competing theories, scientific theories about how old the Earth was at that time.
right.
Okay. And I can't remember, God, this name began with an H, and this is escaping me for the moment.
Well, yeah, geology was already showing how
Right,
ancient the Earth
right.
was.
So there was like two competing theories. So he wasn't going to take sides either one because he honestly was saying he wasn't sure. Although neither of those theories would be like, the world is 6,000 years old, as the Bible says. So, but they were competing scientific theories. So he absolutely, well, look in his notes on Virginia and things like where he'd say he kind of calculated that it would be like physically impossible for there to be enough water to flood the whole earth. That he was, even if like every drop of water that was in the oceans or in the sky or whatever, that it was not possible that there had been the great flood of like Noah's Ark because there just wasn't enough moisture water for that to have been possible. So he was looking at things scientifically. He didn't have the knowledge we have today, of course,
Right.
but there were certain things that were just either like common sense or the scientific knowledge of the time was there, and but those are the things that ended up getting him, labeled an atheist and
Yeah.
all of that because he was contradicting the Bible.
Actually, later in that documentary that I shared, there is some real dishonesty. He kind of quotes Jefferson's take on the French Revolution, which he was an ardent supporter of, saying he has a quote that better had the world desolated than that this revolution fails. Better an Adam and Eve left, only an Adam and Eve in every country than that this fails. And he was trying to say, this is the kind of attitude that people from like Stalin and Hitler, it's okay to slaughter everybody as long as your idea of freedom is that type of line of thought. Well, first off, Jefferson did eventually come to see like Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. He repudiated him completely, like all the other radical Enlightenment did, as kind of a betrayal of the Enlightenment, very clearly in many places. And also Christianity is the thing that kind of caused the tyranny, the Christian fascism is the thing that caused all these, in big part, all these revolutions and government to come about, because it was
Yeah,
so
yeah,
tyrannical and oppressive. So it's just very deceptive language, a lot kind of like Barton there, kind of picking and choosing, kind
right.
of a narrow little scope on one little thing to try to make a point that it ignores the whole reality and context. I did want to quote briefly just to kind of go back to the American level general scale, and this is from actually my book. I actually have a book out. It's called A
Which
Justified
is
Faith.
also disappearing. A justified faith. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a chapter called The Problem of Theocracy. So the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, it was kind of the basis for the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, I believe, and so it was set up, not to not just for Christians. Jefferson says in his autobiography that it's to comprehend within the mantle of his protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mohammedan, the Hindu and infidel of every denomination. Um, So he's saying there explicitly, it's not for just for Christians, even infidels.
Right.
It's even for infidels. We also have the Treaty of Tripoli, that says the U.S. is not a Christian nation. It kind of spells it out explicitly. Um, and there are many other examples, just the overall general American secular nature of America. Okay. So now, moving on to the next segment here, Ms. Rhoda, what do you think about the play Hamilton?
I actually have not seen it.
You haven't seen it, okay?
No.
I think it's really good. I saw it, not in person, but as it's been streaming. Um, yeah. What do you think about the backlash it's getting now, kind of from like cancel culture? People saying it should be canceled because it doesn't. It kind of glorifies these figures that are not worthy of being glorified. And it doesn't hardly address slavery. Which we know Jefferson. That's where I mentioned that asterisk. And my his position in my own personal pantheon of intellectual heroes, because he preached against slavery. He said it was an abomination, and he was kind of among the first people to try to pass legislation against it. But he ended up in the end being kind of a failure there, and he did have kind of sort of racist leanings, like a lot of people did in the
Oh,
time.
of course. And then,
Yeah.
even people back then who, intellectually they knew that slavery was wrong. They knew this is not right. These are people, they shouldn't be enslaved. But they
Right.
still had the prejudices. I mean, look, Jefferson is writings about all the ways that, like, the black people were like physically different from white people. I mean, he almost was studying them as if they were animals. I mean, it's
Yeah.
but I mean, but for his time, and that's why I hate
Well, he
getting
was
into
behind even like
subject.
Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin to an extent about on this topic. And his friend Condorcet, uh, Jonathan Israel talks about how Condorcet went further than anybody as far as equality for blacks and women and education of equality of education and all of that. And he was like a personal friend of Jefferson.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
still, Jefferson, I think, helped Lafayette form the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the French,
right, right.
So in the end, he was a bit of a disappointment. He was surrounded by people that were much more
Oh yeah,
progressive than him on that.
absolutely.
So
But it's one of those subjects that it's like I just hate getting into, because it's like you can't justify it, but
yeah,
you also don't want to vilify the people who
we
are
don't want to hold
like
figures
otherwise did great good for the
right.
country,
Yeah,
but they're always going to have the stain of the slavery. I mean, it just
yeah,
I mean, I don't completely avoid the subject, but
yeah.
it's not you know it's not one of the things I really focus on. But like in my new book, there's the I went through with the newspaper articles about Jefferson at the time, and the way the Federalists would attack him for all sorts of stuff. And uh, the Republicans, Jefferson's party, they didn't believe that anything, because the Federalists lied and lied. They were just like today with the lies and crazy conspiracy theories and all of that. But
Right.
some of the things they were saying about Jefferson were true. And the one, of course, was that the children with Sally Hemings.
Hmm.
So in my book, it's like, I don't avoid that was, or ignore that was there. I put it in just as if this was just a fact of the time. This
Right.
was said about Jefferson, and in this case, the Federalists were right. This was absolutely true.
Now,
You
what I
know,
hope about Sally Hemings, what I hope, and which could be it could be, it's perfectly plausible, is seeing that in the best light that he did love her, and that
I
if he was
suspect
completely
that's
racist, would
possible.
he really even engage? He
Well,
did. He did at least protect their kids. I think he set them
she
free.
was his
Um,
white half his wife who died, she
Right.
was his wife's half sister. She was only a quarter black and looked white. Jefferson had promised his wife that he wouldn't marry anybody else. And of course, he could not have married, even if he wanted to marry Sally Hemings, he couldn't, because she was
Right.
back in those days, it was like if you were an eighth black, you were black.
Right.
Okay. And or if you were the child of a female slave, you were black.
Right.
You were a slave. But is there a possibility? I think so, but I don't want to get into that, and that's a bad subject to get into, because then you'll have people saying, well, you're trying to justify his, raping
Right.
his slaves or to that, and it's one of those things. You know what? Nobody is ever going to know,
Yeah.
and it's a subject that it's just, people that'll try to deny that, like Barton in his book. He tries to
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
deny that Jefferson had children with Sally Hemings by using the one example of one person who claimed to be a son of Jefferson by a slave who wasn't. That was proved with the DNA testing that he wasn't. Not a Hemings, but another one.
Right.
Barton just focuses on that and says, "See, if this wasn't true." So Barton denies that what the DNA tests say is that yes, Jefferson had children with his slave Sally Hemings. Okay, that is what the DNA tests say, and all the circumstantial evidence adds up, and
Yeah.
to deny it. But Barton, because that would make Jefferson not a good Christian, of course, so Barton
Yeah.
denies, flat out says there's no proof. And it's, yes, there is.
Right.
I mean, but I just, I don't, totally avoid this. So you can't totally avoid the subject. But, back to what you're saying about like Hamilton.
Yeah.
It's like there's other reasons that I don't like Alexander Hamilton. And he was one of the, he founded a paper.
I don't really like him either, but yeah, I like to play.
Paper in New York City in the wake
Yeah.
of Jefferson's election, that was one of the papers that spread rumors and lies against the Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party.
Yeah.
Okay, so no, Hamilton. I don't, and there are other reasons that I just don't, that have nothing to do with slavery or anything like that. That I just don't see him as this, unblemished, figure to be celebrated. But I guess
Well, I
it's
think
a
that with the
good
Confederate,
musical, but
yeah, I think with the Confederate statues and the Confederate leaders, they were traitors to the country, and they fought and killed for slavery.
right.
So
And I think it's a totally different thing. I mean,
yeah,
looking at the ones who actively fought to keep slavery.
for them it was a feature, and the founders it was a bug, basically. And the founders did more, were some of the first people to really do a lot of substantial things to end slavery, even though a lot of them failed.
But they could have done more, and it's going to be debatable forever what they actually could have done, what they were capable of doing, how much they tried to do.
But especially like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine, they were very, very
Franklin definitely was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was part of the American Anti-Slavery Society, I believe, or at some point. Yeah. One quick thing to notice here is about the under God. We see God all over our money. But the fact a lot of that was put in the 1950s, almost all of it, due to the scare of communism. So the guy that wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, I believe, was a Christian socialist.
Francis Bellamy. He was
he was a socialist, right?
Socialist.
Yeah. How many people on the right know that?
No, then again, like but all they care about is the word God is in it, and they don't even care about the
under God was not in the original pledge.
No, it wasn't in the original. It wasn't even in the second. There was a second version in the 1920s. That was there was a change made. To the Pledge Allegiance to. Originally, it just said Pledge Allegiance to my flag. They changed it to Pledge Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America because of the coming in, that they wanted to ensure that they were pledging their allegiance to the American flag and not saying I pledge allegiance to my flag, and in their head thinking the flag of their native country. So there was that change in the 1920s. And then, of course, in the 1950s, or whenever it was,
Under God was not originally on our money, on our paper money. It wasn't on our coins until the Civil War, and it wasn't in our pledge until the 1950s.
right.
And it's ironic, you know, the line directly following that, it says, oh God, I don't remember the pledge. It says under God, indivisible, and putting the under God makes it divisible, makes us, it
Right,
divides
right,
us.
of course. Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, okay. All right. Next, I'd like to get to those Andrew Seidel quotes, if you don't mind, real quick.
Yeah, actually, when you mentioned that book, I was thinking that's a book I have. It actually isn't, and I don't want to discuss a book that I haven't read.
Oh, it's a couple of small quotes. It's a
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So he says, the Puritans and Pilgrims, in fact, created Christian nations. They established pure theocracies, strongly religious governments able to stamp out heresy and banish or execute schismatics. They imposed the death penalty for worshiping other gods, blasphemy, homosexuality, and adultery. They massacred hundreds of native peoples, imagining themselves in the light of the massacres of Joshua. This is what a Christian nation looks like: exclusive, exclusionary, divisive, hateful, severe, and lethal, resembling theocracies in the Middle East. After surveying this bloody history, the founders decided to build a wall that would forever separate state and church. They disestablished religion and abolished religious tests for public office. They invented the secular state. So that's a good point about, you know, the original, you know, settlements in America. They were Christian and they were very oppressive.
But that
Uh,
continued after the federal constitution. That's the
y-
subject
y-
of my new book. It's in Connecticut. They were still under it was called the Saybrook Platform. It was a combination of Congregationalism and Presbyterianism that was
yeah,
merged into one in 1708 in the town of Saybrook. That's why it's called the Saybrook Platform. Merged into one state religion, and that went all the way through 1818 in Connecticut.
I know
That,
some
that
of
yeah,
the state constitutions were definitely not as, they were kind of backward compared to
yeah,
the federal constitution.
yeah.
And one more quote from him. He says, Christian nationalism claims a nation dedicated to the freedom of and from religion is dedicated to one particular religion. It insists that a nation with a godless constitution is dedicated to one particular God. A religion that demands fearful, unwavering obedience takes credit for a rebellion and revolution and self-governance. The founding documents of the U.S. revere and protect freedom above all else. The Bible worships and demands the opposite: obedience, submission, and servility. Um, so yeah, again, those contradictions there, uh, that are very, very loud and clear. Um, to close, Miss Rhoda, I want to just share my screen one more time. That's all right. Tell me if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I just wanted to go kind of end with some more quotes from Jefferson, because I mean they're just so rich and there's so many of them, and kind of get your input on. And this is something I did years ago that I kind of compiled them together. One great book that I found that has literally everything that Jefferson and James Madison that they ever wrote on religion or separation of church and state. It's called Jefferson and Madison on Separation of Church and State. It's edited by Lenny Brenner. It's a great resource because again, it has like literally everything they ever wrote about that subject. Let's see. Okay, this is a letter from Jefferson to William Short, and a lot of sorry about that. A lot of Jefferson's best letters are, it seems, to William Short. Like they had a really great
Well, that's what
correspondence.
you mentioned way earlier about the in one of the quotes about his in the instructor at William and Mary. That's who that
Right.
was.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is to William Short, August 4th, 1820. We find in the writings of Jesus' biographers a groundwork of vulgar ignorance, of things impossible, of superstitions, fanaticisms, and fabrications. His object was the reformation of the religion of the Jews as taught by Moses. That sect had presented for the object of their worship a being of terrific character, cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust. That Jesus did not mean to impose himself on mankind as the Son of God, physically speaking, I have been convinced. But that he might conscientiously believe himself inspired from above is very possible. The whole religion of the Jews inculcated on him uh, from his infancy was founded in the disbelief. Sorry about that. Was founded. The whole religion of the Jews inculcated on him from his infancy was founded in the belief that of the divine inspiration, the fumes of the most disordered. Lost my place. The fumes of the most distorted imaginations were recorded in their religious texts. This belief, therefore, carried no more personal imputation than the belief of Socrates that himself was under the care and admonitions of a guardian demon. So, basically, he calls the God of the Jews, cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust, and talks about how they were kind of the most disordered minds. Now he has one letter to William Short where he kind of goes through like everything that he finds ridiculous
Oh,
about.
the list of the thing that the Christian nationalists hate, and the list of all the things in the Bible that he
Yeah,
doesn't believe, where he explicitly says
right,
that he does not believe in this whole list of things that you would need to believe to be a Christian.
right. And
Yes.
he talks about I think I have it in here, but he talks about the resurrection and basically
Virgin
everything.
birth, the
Yeah,
resurrection. I mean,
right,
it's just it was a foot. It was actually, I believe, it was a footnote to a letter
right,
that
right,
he listed in detail, like every single thing that he in the Bible that he didn't believe.
right. This is another letter to William Short. He says, the serious enemies are the priests of the different religious sects, to whose spells on the human mind its improvement is ominous. The Presbyterian clergy are loudest, the most intolerant of all sects, the most tyrannical and ambitious, ready at the word of the lawgiver, if such a word can now be obtained, to put the torch to the pile and to rekindle in this virgin hemisphere the flames in which their oracle Calvin consumed the poor Servetus. So he says here in a letter to Francis Adrian Vanderkamp on July 30th, 1816, ridicule is the only weapon which can be used against unintelligible propositions. Ideas must be distinct before reason can act upon them. The Trinity is the mere abracadabra of the mountebanks calling themselves the priests of Jesus. Then he has another one where he talks about he kind of, again, kind of kills the idea of the Trinity. This is a good one. The day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being as his father in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter. But we may hope that the dawn of reason and freedom of thought in these United States will do away with all this artificial scaffolding. Uh, so,
He also predicted some wrong things. Like he predicted that within a generation, like everybody in the United States would be Unitarian. He predicted that. That was wrong.
yeah, he was wrong about that.
But I think because he believed that some of the stuff was just so crazy and ridiculous. And like I said, it was just like,
Hmm.
if you compare it to other cultures, mythology that everyone's out, that's just a myth. But I mean, look at the
Right,
Bible, and how is that not as crazy as some of the stuff in the like Jupiter and Minerva and whatever.
right,
But I think for and actually for anyone even now that considers some of this stuff like in the Bible, like how can anybody actually believe that's literal,
yeah,
and I think he was the same way. Like he probably that people there's lots of people that believe this is literal, really happened stuff, but it's you read it and you're like, how how can anybody believe that that is literal? You know?
Yeah. Another one. This is from Notes on Virginia. This is one of the books. I think maybe the only book he published.
Yeah, it was.
Um, it says millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burnt, tortured, fined, and imprisoned, yet we have not advanced an inch towards uniformity. What has been the effects of coercion to make half the world fools and the other half hypocrites? And this is maybe my favorite letter of Jefferson that he wrote to, I believe while he was in France, he wrote to his nephew Peter Carr on August 10th, 1787. And he says, shake off all the fears and servile prejudices under which weak minds are servilely crouched. Fix reason firmly in her seat and call on her tribunal for every fact and every opinion. Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. And later he goes on to talk about, reason is the only oracle given you by heaven, and you're not to believe anything because any people or description of people said they believed it. And read the Gospels I think he says, read them like you read Tacitus or
Yeah,
Livy.
Libby, yeah.
And he says, don't fear any consequences. If it leads you to the belief that there is no God, and there's all kinds of benefits that can get you.
Well, he
But don't.
believed that nobody, like children, should not study religion. He didn't believe, and this is where him being used by people who want like religion in like public schools and stuff. Jefferson didn't think children should be taught the Bible until they were old enough to make a decision for themselves whether they believed it or not.
Right. Oh yeah, and he said that a professorship of theology should have no place in our institution when it came to his university in Virginia. He says history, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil government. This marks the lowest grade of ignorance of which their political as well as religious leaders will always avail themselves for their own purpose, and that's to Baron von Humboldt of 1813. And by the way, we're not going to get into all the letters of
Yeah,
all
there's
the
a
other
lot of books.
founders,
Yeah.
but Thomas Paine, obviously The Age of Reason was a book that he wrote that's an all-out attack on Christianity. Um, and there's a lot of quotes you can get from there, and as well as a lot of the others. This is on the dogmas of religion as distinguished from moral principles. All mankind from the beginning of the world to this day have been quarreling, fighting, burning, and torturing one another for abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. And this was to Carey, 1816. He did separate the morality from religion. He has one quote that I really like that I included in a blog that I did called "Atheist Before Darwin," where he talks about how's it go exactly? He says basically he says morality can't be founded on just the belief that on God and the belief that doing good is pleasing to God. Because look at atheists like Diderot and Dolbach and Condorcet and D'Alembert, and that these are known to have been some of the most virtuous of men. So their foundation of morals couldn't have been God, obviously.
Right.
Let's see. He does have that quote from Notes on Virginia where he says laws reach how's it go? Laws reach conclusions only and not opinions, and that it does me no injury for my neighbor to say there's 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg.
That was one of the quotes that was used against him through, like, not just before he was elected, but
Right. Yeah.
well, throughout his presidency, to the point where, like, in the newspapers, they didn't even have to print the whole quote anymore. They just had to say Jefferson's 20 gods, and everybody knew what they were talking about. That quote was used so much back then that Jefferson's 20 gods.
Yeah. He says here Christianity neither is nor ever was a part of the common law. A letter to Thomas Cooper in 1814. And I was reading over the copy of one of my books of yours that I have, Jefferson Lies, talking about the emblem, the coin that he put, like, on one side of it, he wanted there to be like the children of Israel, but on the other side, it was some pagan. I can't remember the name.
That. Oh, I know
I can't
this.
remember their name.
I've got it. I know it's in my books.
Yeah. but they like fought against. They were pagans that fought against Christianity,
Yes.
and so I guess
And I
yeah,
can't, the name is escaping me at the moment, but they were basically the what
Anglo-Saxon pagans fighting against
the
Christianity.
prevented Christian, halted Christianity's spread.
Hengist,
So I'm
Hengist and Horsa.
yes,
They
Hanging
were an
Sword. Yeah,
Anglo-Saxon
yeah.
legend. Germanic heathens hired as mercenaries to protect Britain after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, and they fought against the spread of Christianity. So,
Right.
and he in a couple of letters he talks about how the common law was Anglo-Saxon pagan. It
Well,
wasn't.
the thing with what he believed, and this is through studying, he like traced this back
Yeah.
and discovered that the original laws from Alfred, okay, that Alfred's introduction to them was not the religious introduction. That was added by somebody later, and that it made no sense. So he actually really traced. He wasn't just saying off the top of his head, like, Christianity is no part of the common law. He actually like traced this back, like through the centuries of like, well, how did Christianity get into the common law? And he wrote about this in detail. I believe there's a well-known letter where he writes it to Thomas Cooper, but there's a more in-depth letter where he writes it, which I believe is to John Adams, and really explains his reason for saying that.
Yeah. He says in every country and in every age, the priest has been hostile to liberty. He is always in alliance with a despot. That's to Horatio Spafford in March 17th, 1814. You mentioned the letter to the Danbury Baptist, where he says, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Um, and this is one where I think he was talking about, yeah, it's from his autobiography in reference to the Virginia Act of Religious Freedom, where he says the preamble declares that coercion is a departure from the plan of our holy author of our religion. An amendment was proposed by inserting Jesus Christ so that it would read a departure from the plan of Jesus Christ, the holy author of our religion. And the insertion was rejected by the great majority and proved that they meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and Gentile, Christian and Mohammedan, Hindu and infidel of every denomination. There's one letter where he's talking about somebody was comparing demonism, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but demonism is worse than atheism, basically. And he says, I concur with you strictly in your opinion of the comparative merits of atheism and demonism, and really see nothing but the latter and the being worshipped by many who think themselves Christian. And this was to Richard Price, January 18, 1789. He had written to him talking about would not society be better without such religions, and basically, so he's calling the God of the Bible a demon. It sounds to me like. All right, some of these were touched on in that video.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, the quotes you can use to show that Jefferson was
yeah,
are endless. I mean, look how many we've
right,
done
right.
already. I mean, there's just there's just so many.
Priests dread the advance of science as witches do the approach of daylight. Uh, that was one to I think it has something to do with this college. It was a letter to Korea de Sarah on April 11th, 1820. Uh, almost to the end of this year. This was the one about immaterial existences. So the talk of immaterial existences is a talk of nothings. To say that the human soul, God, or immaterial is to say they are nothings, or that there is no God or soul. I cannot reason otherwise. And I think he says, when we quit sensation, all is like the wind. And it really makes me think, because I think more than once, he did call himself an Epicurean, so he was, a follower of Epicurus. He called himself a sect unto himself, but he called himself a materialist more than once. So I'm thinking, like how does that work exactly if you believe in some type of, whatever, some type of mind or God apart from the world? How is that? But you're a materialist. You think everything is material, and all thought is an emergent property of the material. So how does that work? you know, um, I don't know.
I don't really try to get into like exactly what they believe, because like someone like Jefferson,
No.
I think he kind of waffled and didn't like. The only thing that's certain is that he did not believe in anything that anyone would say was Christianity today. Okay.
Right. Right. Right.
Other than that, I mean, these are people that like thought all the time, like their brains were
Yeah.
like always going. So if he, one time said this, one time said that, and they don't quite add up, it's like to try to examine every quote and
Mhm.
everything he said and make them all
But
make
like you
sense.
said, they do establish very completely what he was not. He did not believe in the
Right. That's
Bible
what I said. It's
whatsoever.
the only thing you can be
He
sure of.
maligned the Bible. You know, he didn't believe in the
Right.
resurrection, virgin birth, all that. And he was a
Right.
secularist.
Right. You can be sure about what they didn't believe if they said they didn't believe it. As far as what they
Right.
did believe, and I just don't get into it. I don't,
Yeah.
you know,
He does say our civil rights have no dependence upon our religious opinions more than
yeah.
our opinions in physics or geometry. Um, let's see. I think I'm about to the end of this. I like this quote: "The Gothic idea that we are to look backwards instead of forwards for the improvement of the human mind, and to recur to the annals of our ancestors for what is most perfect in government and religion and learning, is worthy of those bigots in religion and government by whom it has been recommended and whose purposes it would answer. But it is not an idea which this country will endure." And that's a letter to Joseph Priestley, who I think kind of inspired him a little bit in his religious opinions. He was a I think he had his like laboratory destroyed in England because he was so
Oh yeah. Yeah.
unorthodox. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna say my battery's not gonna last too much longer
Oh,
here.
sure.
So just to give you the heads up, I don't want
I
to
got you.
suddenly disappear on you.
Yeah, I think we're at the end there, so go ahead and
It's been very interesting though.
absolutely. Yeah. I've studied Jefferson a lot. I have read a lot of books about him. So yeah, it was great to have you on. Um, and yeah, your books are very interesting and very good resources also. Um, so and I'm definitely going to check out your new book. I had no idea you had a new book out. So that was from Theocracy, excuse me, from Theocracy to Religious Liberty, and that came out a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great,
It's on Amazon. Of
excellent,
course, everything's on Amazon.
right?
Amazon rules the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, all right. Well, again, Mr. Rhoda, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Rob.
Um, all right, you take care. Bye.
You. Bye.